It's the kind of entertainment that we want in the United States.
I never thought I'd live to see all those bands.
Nothing can top the show that Mason City put on today.
Someone once cleverly remarked that true success never begins with the word try. And in no year does that ring more true than in the year 1936. Who could forget the first radio broadcast of the song Back in the Saddle Again, sung by Gene Autry?
Back in the saddle again.
Or Margaret Mitchell's Pulitzer Prize winner, Gone with the Wind. It was a year when Bette Davis won the Best Actress for her role in the movie Dangerous. And RCA presented to the press a little black box known as television. All of America was alive with creative energy of new ideas. And in the Midwest, one small Iowa town was the birthplace of a tradition that has been going strong for many decades. On June 23, 1936, Mason City, Iowa, would introduce a musical festival that would change the course of its history. Early Monday morning, the first North Iowa Band Festival Parade started a tradition that would gain international fame. With only minutes before the parade was to start, people were quickly finding a suitable spot to watch. It was a crowd never seen before in Mason City. An estimated 10,000 people were lined up along Federal Avenue and adjoining streets. Farmers, barbers, clerks, accountants, almost everyone had closed up shop for the day to watch the very first Iowa Bandmasters Convention come to town. As the crowd looked on, 800 high school musicians from all over North Iowa were anxiously awaiting the start of the festivities. They were decked out in their finest garb, poised and ready to play.
So the sun would be there shining on all of those instruments and all those beautiful band uniforms. When we first started, many of the bands didn't have uniforms.
When time came for the parade to begin, bandmaster and president of the Iowa Bandmasters Association, Carlton Stewart, signaled for the parade to start. The first North Iowa Band Festival was finally underway. It was an impressive display of music with 18 Iowa high school bands and one drum and bugle corps high-stepping through Mason City. Flashy helmets, colorful uniforms, and polished instruments could be seen for miles. Even the floats were decked out in splendor, including the first float in the parade, the Spirit of 36. As bands and floats passed, resounding applause came from the crowd, and Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce, Lester Milligan, knew it was going to be a huge success.
He was a Chamber of Commerce man. It was promoting your town, and he was promoting music. And he was always very interested in young people. It combined his work promoting Mason City. It promoted the bands and the youth and music.
The entire community was delighted with the outpouring of music from these 800 young musicians. Later that night, the pageantry of music continued at Mason City's Roosevelt Stadium with solos by professional musicians and an impressive performance of 30 bands unified into a mammoth assemblage led by none other than Carlton Stewart. As the night came to a dramatic close, the men who made it possible were ecstatic. The first band festival ever to be attempted in North Iowa was a hit. The town was buzzing. People were proud, and the band kids were excited. Days after the parade ended, Norman C. Owen, the band director for West Union, wrote,
I think your festival was a great thing. I sure hope you have another one next year. I know my youngsters had more fun in their one day at Mason City than they had in all their contest trips last spring put together. Put me down as one who enthusiastically and sincerely endorses your festival idea.
The following year, committee members began the quest to host a second band festival without the assistance of the Iowa Bandmasters Association. With help from local retailers and banks, the Chamber was able to collect $1,500 for their fundraising campaign. With the money safe in the bank, it didn't take long for the convention committee to unanimously vote for continuation of the festival. But this was only the beginning. They had to tackle something even more important than budget plans, and that was how to feed the band kids.
We used to feed the youngsters over at our churches, and they chose churches that were downtown as close as they could get because there were no cars, for the youngsters. And I happened to be at the Methodist church, and we fed them regular meals, with hot dishes and everything, and we were so proud of them.
Just to make certain everyone knew what was expected, Lester Milligan gave the churches a friendly lunch reminder.
It is hoped that every one of you will give these youngsters a good, warm, wholesome meal with plenty of milk to drink, plenty of bread or rolls, and good filling food like meat, potatoes, and gravy. There'll be hungry youngsters who will have gotten up early. They'll be either standing or marching some 20 blocks in the parade. So let's be really hospitable and hope that it will result in a general good of Mason City.
While the menu was being decided, Chairman John Vance and Band Festival Chairman B.L. Nichols sent out invitations to the high schools in a 30-mile radius around Mason City. Each high school that accepted the invitation was then given a travel allowance, full membership privileges to the YMCA for a day, and free movie tickets. With such an offer, it didn't take long for schools to respond.
And of course, at that time, I just thought it was just a good idea, because we were all proud as a peacocks because we won the National Band Contest.
Finally, after much hard work and preparation, Tuesday, June 22nd had arrived, and with it, the second annual North Iowa Band Festival. The town was besieged with banners and signs. Parking lots and streets were filled with cars. Just a short distance away, people jammed the sidewalks and streets to watch 1,300 area musicians make their way through town. Fire-catching baton twirlers, extravagant floats, and 30 high school bands made their way down Federal Avenue Tuesday morning. It was the biggest musical festival to date. Spectators were lined up 3 or 4 deep, up and down the parade route, trying to get a better view of all the bands. So incredible were the day's events that D.G. Klintnauer, General Chairman of the committee, proclaimed on radio, "I'm glad to inform my listeners that this year's festival exceeds that of last year. The Chamber of Commerce has given much of its time during the last month to make this day a day of joyous musical entertainment."
We are now ready for the formal entry of the Queen's candidates of 1938 in alphabetical order.
The festival evolved further with the annual crowning of a queen. 2,000 musicians brought the crowd to its feet as 35 candidates for queen from surrounding towns rode into Roosevelt Stadium as part of the Iowa Centennial, 85th anniversary of Mason City, and the 3rd annual band festival. The girls waved to the crowd, then were deposited in front of a long canvas pathway. They were then led up to the stage, introduced to the public, and presented with an engraved compact.
Probably just keep creating interest. All the schools, of course, they were really interested to send their best girl to the competition in the school to decide who's going to be the queen candidate.
The idea of the band queen had been
kicked around a little bit, but it was something that the committee wasn't ready to get involved with until they got a request from some high school band directors saying the kids in the band would like to have a queen. Then it went over big.
We are now ready for the formal introduction of our newly crowned Miss North Iowa.
Let Me Call You Sweetheart flooded the old Roosevelt Stadium as 17-year-old Shirley Morgan from Sheffield, Iowa, stepped inside. Wearing a royal blue velvet robe trimmed with gold braid, she made her way to the stage where Webster placed a rhinestone crown on the top of her head and presented her with a wristwatch. The crowd was very receptive to this new aspect of Band Festival. Mr. Burlingame, Executive Secretary of the Iowa Territorial Centennial, one of the judges, even wrote in a letter to Miss Sheffield.
The charm and wholesome beauty of all the queens who participated convinced me that our descendants in 2038 will have difficulty in equaling the group that gathered at Mason City this Tuesday. I trust that your coronations gave you as much satisfaction as we judges derived from the pleasant task of selecting you.
No runner-up in the Queens. Never a runner-up. Every Queen candidate there was to go home thinking that she might have been second. She might have been runner-up.
During World War II, the North Iowa Band Festival was put on hold, like many events across the country. Americans were preoccupied with worry over their troops, and no one felt it was right to hold a celebration until peace was restored. However, when the war ended in 1945, preparations were soon underway for the 8th North Iowa Band Festival and the Iowa Centennial Homecoming Celebration. As Band Festival organizers tried to pull off the biggest and greatest band festival to date, the Mason City Chamber, with help from Carlton Stewart, focused on obtaining the best marching band in the country, the United States Army Band. The 80-piece musical group was known to be the largest concert and marching band in the armed forces. Formed in France during World War I, the band had made musical history and was recognized as the most outstanding military band of all time. Wanting to give the Iowa high school bands an opportunity to see the country's most famous marching band, Carlton Stewart and the Band Festival Committee quickly contacted Iowa Congressman John Gwynn and the War Department about bringing the band to Mason City. Congressman Gwynn wrote back stating it could be done. However, it would take considerable preliminary preparation to do so. If Mason City was willing to pay $1,500 up front and be responsible for the Army's food, lodging, and entertainment, the band would travel to Iowa. Since the town couldn't afford to keep the 85-member band for more than a day, Lester Milligan quickly sent word to various towns in Iowa asking if they would be interested in having a United States Army band come to their town to play. At first, the responses were great. Waterloo, Charles City, and Des Moines agreed to participate within a matter of days. But as the weeks went by, the Chamber couldn't recruit 5 additional towns to share in the expense. With renewed spirit, the Chamber sought after other Iowa towns as prospective hosts. In a matter of days, they enlisted the towns needed to bring the prestigious band to town. On June 17, 1946, the United States Army Band was in Mason City to join 34 high school bands for the 8th Annual North Iowa Band Festival. Animated and drawn-out applause greeted the assemblage of 80 bands. The spectacular performance, under the direction of Hugh J. Curry, was a thrilling experience for all those who attended.
Stewart felt that we should have some of these band directors from around the United States, service bands, etc., to come with their bands, the service bands, or for these directors to come and be directors of the mass band, because this would be an opportunity for the students.
By 1946, the North Iowa Band Festival was so much a part of Mason City, it was common for the Band Festival Committee to link other important events with it. One such link was the 100-year anniversary of the founding of Mason City. While committee member Remley J. Glass and John Vance began the special 15th Annual Band Festival by inviting old-timers back to Mason City, the Mason City Chamber decided to hold a contest for a new Centennial design. The rules were simple. Create a Centennial design, and the winning design would be used for this year's celebration. Soon, Centennial designs came pouring in. Ann Sutton from Plymouth, Iowa, drove out to visit Lester Milligan and look over the designs. However, as she studied the entries, she noticed that no one had written a Centennial song for Mason City. With great excitement, Sutton quickly went home, sat at her living room piano, and began composing a song for the Centennial celebration. When she finished the song, she mailed it to the chamber and awaited the verdict. She didn't have to wait long. A week later, Remley Glass informed her that her song had been accepted and would be used during the Centennial. Sutton was beside herself. Overcome with emotion, she quickly wrote Glass back to thank him and to tell him why she had written the song.
I wrote it for Mason City. I feel that Mason City is most remarkable in so many ways, and although my parents were not among the very first settlers, they did come when the country was very new.
Indeed, the 1953 Band Festival had everything that year: music, floats, and 100 bands from Iowa and Minnesota marching in the parade. 5,000 band members and 100 Queen candidates, including Mason City's very first Queen candidate, marched across town, followed by floats, baton twirlers, and horses. In 1958, the North Iowa Band Festival made headlines once again, but for different reasons. Mason City's native son, Meredith Wilson, was in town for the North Iowa Band Festival. For the first time in its history, 5,000 musicians would descend upon Mason City to pay tribute to the town's favorite son. The town was excited about Wilson's visit. Meredith Wilson's musical comedy, The Music Man, was now a Broadway hit. It was with no little pride that 21,000 people came early to the 20th Annual North Iowa Band Festival to catch a glimpse of Wilson. Spectators sat as high as they could to watch him lead the 76 trombones through Mason City. The 76 trombones, made up of 208 boys and girls, were handpicked from various bands. They were then placed in alphabetical order with their Queen candidate riding ahead of them. It was a moment that has lived on in spectators' minds for decades. Once the procession was over, the parade started with 93 marching bands, 87 Queen candidates, and 12 special floats depicting the story of the Music Man. Meredith Wilson was so gratified by the positive reception, he promised to lead the 76 trombones down the streets of Mason City again. But Wilson vowed that next time he would bring Hollywood with him. Lights, camera, action, as the saying goes. In 1962, Mason City, Iowa lit up as brightly as Hollywood. The air was filled with excitement as movie stars and leading press representatives began arriving in town to see the parade and to catch the premiere of The Music Man on the big screen. Robert Preston, Shirley Jones, Meredith Wilson, Ronnie Howard, Morton DaCosta, Arthur Godfrey, and others were here for what would be the biggest band festival ever seen.
Most people in this area, it was their one chance to see Shirley Jones, Arthur Godfrey, Ronnie Howard, to see all these people in person, close up. And you know, they were all such charming people. That you never saw them even frown. They were all such happy people when they were here that day.
Waiting for the big parade was like waiting for Christmas. The town was buzzing. The kids were counting down the days. Meanwhile, Lester Milligan worked tirelessly to make sure that every state in the country was invited to the North Iowa Band Festival. He had to raise more money than ever and oversee the public relations side of the band festival.
He was gone all day. He started out in the morning and he was going all day long. But you wouldn't see him the rest of the day unless you get a glimpse of him walking somewhere.
As the days grew closer to the parade, 80 regional school bands were primed and ready. Just as prepared were 30 out-of-state bands, ready to march down Federal Avenue for the first time. While preparations were going well for the most part, the city still had a problem. Who was going to house the out-of-state bands?
It was Bob Eisenstein who took charge of that and was very aggressive in getting neighborhoods to sponsor a band. Whether it was planned or not, what did develop was a huge amount of backing by those neighborhood people for their band.
They would assign certain youngsters, certain bands to certain churches in Mason City.
Finally, the countdown was over, and the day everyone was waiting for had arrived. Over 250,000 people attended the gala event. So grand and so alive was this musical concert. Hazel Flynn from the Hollywood Citizen News wrote,
Over 1,000 trombones instead of just 76 split the air over Mason City as this town threw a lollapalooza of dual celebrations. Have you ever watched 121 bands march by? It went on for hours. Big bands, little bands, bands wearing every color of the rainbow, playing every kind of selection from Stars and Stripes Forever to the score from The Music Man.
The day's festivities ended with a special evening ceremony with 15,000 people crammed into Roosevelt Stadium to watch Paul Yoder, Meredith Wilson, and Carlton Stewart lead the massed bands for another stirring performance of music. After the evening festivities, thousands of folks lined the streets to watch the Hollywood stars head into the Palace Theater for the premiere of The Music Man.
It's a fantastic movie. It's just unbelievable. And to know that you're sitting right there with the people that played in it is quite an experience.
As the movie started, the people of Mason City began to relax. River City had done its part to make the parade of 1962 one of the most memorable to have marched through Mason City.
And honored guest for this year's event, the man who has steered the festival through 25 years without ever being rained out, will be Mr. Band Festival himself, Lester Milligan.
On Tuesday, June 11th, 1963, people came out in droves to celebrate and honor one of its founders, the man who successfully guided Band Festival through a quarter of a century. It had been a long and joyous quarter of a century of promoting and leading the Band Festival. Retiring from a position he had held since 1923, Lester Milligan was stepping down. The man who would rather lead from behind rather than out in front was an inspiration to every music player, and the town would not let him forget it.
It was kind of a unique personality. He loved people, and he always wanted everyone else to get the credit. He would never do anything that would call attention to himself. And so when he was retired and they had some events for him, it was difficult for him to handle those events.
Lester Milligan watched 82 bands and 77 Queen candidates pass by, plus 23 floats, and the National Senior Baton Twirling Champion of America, Miss Joyce Rice of Greenfield, Iowa. Once the Monroe Junior High School Band and the Mason City Trail Riders Club walked by, Lester Milligan's role in promoting Band Festival would be passed on to others. Days came and went, and times changed, but Band Festival continued to thrive in River City. Band Festival wasn't even rained out until 1969. In 1970, Band Festival moved to Saturday and stays that way even today. In 1987, President Reagan presented the nation's highest civilian award to Mason City's own music man, Meredith Wilson, and I quote, "To honor fellow Americans who made a difference, Americans who represent the very best of our country." 1988 marked the 50th Band Festival, and tens of thousands of people from all over the country came to watch and celebrate Mason City's rich history of music.
At the 50th, we also started something called Middle School Mania. I tried to look at Band Festival and changed into a whole community event. Tried to incorporate different ages of students, also tried to incorporate entertainment that would reach out to everybody, so there'd be something for everybody.
In the 90s, the North Iowa Band Festival had its second king, nearly 5 decades after Bill Storer was crowned as the first king back in 1949. In 1999, Shirley Jones, who played Marion the Librarian in The Music Man, returned to River City as Grand Marshal of the parade. For 2 days, folks gathered to hear an old friend reminisce about the good old days.
Meredith had talked so much about the bands and his being in the Sousa band for several years, but I'd never seen so many bands all together in one day.
People, music, and creativity brought Mason City and surrounding communities together. In 1936, a multitude of people in this small Iowa community decided they would do something more than try. They would actually do it. In return, high school bands from all over Iowa showed their approval by expressing their desire to be a part of such a musical event. From 1936 on, the North Iowa Band Festival introduced a display of musical talent that became an important part of the very fabric of Mason City. While the bands today may be smaller, the results achieved provide a refreshing reminder that one man's dreams have become a part of everyday lives.